Thank you, Susie. Thank you, Ayana. Thank you, Ruben. And thank you all, Race Before Race team, for having me in the company of such fabulous scholars in the room. And thank you, ACMRS staff members. I mean, you guys do everything so beautifully and run it so gracefully. So thank you so much. Yeah. So this is totally a new work, so I'm really excited to share it and hear your thoughts. In 1671, John Milton published his final work, Samson Agonistes, a dramatic reimagining of the biblical Samson. For those who need to refresh up their Bible, in Judges, Samson is a Nazarite, set apart from birth, gifted with extraordinary strength to deliver Israel from Philistine domination. He repeatedly clashes with Philistines until his Philistinian lover, Delilah, extracts the secret of his strength, his uncut hair, leading to his capture, blinding, and humiliation. And in the end, Samson dies, bringing down the Philistine temple, killing Philistinians and himself in Gaza. No longer a judge or ruler, as in Judges, Milton Samson is born as a promised annihilator, conscripted into violence by ideological apparatuses, father, nation, religion, for mass destruction. Two of the striking points of Milton's rewriting, and I will trace this in my talk today, are the gendering of Samson with an emphasis on his hair and turning Delilah into Samson's wife, his love, whose cutting of his hair results in a genocide. I ask, what might Milton's Samson predict from Gaza today? That question, and the title of my talk, What Samson Predicts from Gaza About Love in the Time of Genocide, echoes another reimagining of Samson. Lucille Clifton's poem, Samson Predicts from Gaza the Philadelphia Fire. This poem's Samson speaks to Romana Africa, the only adult survivor of 1985 police bombing of the Move House in Philadelphia. It will be your hair, Romana Africa. They will come for you. They will bring fire. They will empty your eyes of everything you love. Your hair will writhe and hiss on your shoulder, and they will order you to give it up. If you do, you will bring the temple down. If you do not, they will. Clifton forges a charged link between the biblical Samson and contemporary black resistance through hair, connecting Samson's shorn locks to the dreadlocks worn by MOVE members as both radical aesthetic and political defiance. This state-orchestrated act of terror of bombing black Philadelphians killed 11 people, destroyed 61 homes, and displaced more than 250 residents. Speaking from Gaza, Clifton's Samson, blind, enslaved, and stripped of power, appears as a transhistorical figure through which hair emerges as a racialized signifier of strength and vulnerability under the gaze and conflagration of the state. I take Lucille Clifton's poem both as provocation and analytical frame for revisiting Milton's Samson, specifically symbolic valences of Samson's hair and its entanglement with gender formation, racial legibility, and bodily vulnerability, as well as interracial love and desire. I will pretty much follow one of the questions in the program: how can you love a being, a nation, a profession? And I come back, how can you love a being that's racially other and nation? Is it possible to do this both at the same time? Tracing Samson's gender and his relation with Philistinian Delilah, I locate in Samson Agonistes a poetics of unmaking, where embodiment becomes spectacle, gender becomes porous, and destruction becomes a mode of reform configuration. In this unmaking, the poem destabilizes and reroutes the structural binaries that animate it within political power structures: male-female, self-other, Jew, Philistine, sovereign, subjugated. In dialogue with Clifton's poem, I will end reading Milton's The Theater of Destruction alongside the ongoing devastation of Palestinian life, where hair, fire, and spectacle converge in a renewed performance of state violence. Gaza is not a metaphor. It is the stage on which the Samsonic logics of divine election, racial punishment, and terror are once again made visible in our own time. Samson Agonistes begins with Samson's anguished reflections on the loss of his power as he dwells on the gendered failure of revealing his secret. He mourns the gift of strength he once possessed, yet shrouds in its mystery. In what part, Lord, how easily bereft me under the seal of silence couldn't keep, but weakly to a woman must reveal it, or come with impunity and tears. His confession of mental weakness before a woman whom he loved, figured as feminizing in both cause and effect, culminates in the belated disclosure that my gift was hung it in my hair. Hair here is not a neutral marker, but an arbitrary instrument of gendering, both divine seal and bodily excess, liable to be undone by love, by the lover's touch, weeping, and betrayal. In the early modern period, as Will Fisher and others have shown, hair was a prosthesis inscribing gender. Across early modern discourses of anatomy, theology, and moral reform, hair was a crucial site where gender, morality, and bodily legibility were contested and enforced. Hair signified not only of norms and deviations from them, but also gender transformations. Writers including John Bulwer, Ambrose Paré, William Preen regularly denounced women with short hair and men with long as, quote, contrary to the intention of nature. Long hair on men was racialized as a marker of cultural, religious, and moral alterity. English observers associated unregulated hair with barbarism and deviation from white Christian and European norms. Bulwer, for instance, surveys global hair practices to condemn what he sees as unnatural excess. He criticizes barbarous Indians for allowing their hair to grow unchecked, claiming they, quote, enter into nearer alliance with beasts than ever nature intended. Thomas Hall marks proper hair length as divinely mandated and its transgression as a sin against nature. Many heathens, he writes on men, wear long hair, which is their abuse and sin. The language of contrary to nature and sin against nature, terms frequently used to denote sodomy, links long hair not only to gender inversion, but to sexual perversion, as simultaneously encoded in cultural, theological, and ontological terms. Rather than mapping hairstyle onto stable gender position, however, Samson Agonistes constructs hair as a vexed and shifting signifier that resists legibility and indexes difference across gendered, racial, and political axes. Almost every character in Samson Agonistes comments on Samson's hair, and nearly all link it not only to his strength, but also his mutable gender. The most revealing articulation comes from Samson himself. Samson attributes his fall to erotic susceptibility, his love entanglement with fair Philistine woman, first Timnah, then Delilah. Milton's revision of the biblical Delilah into Samson's wife intensifies the affective and sexual transgression. Samson, softened with pleasure, oscillates between desire and repudiation, ultimately renaming his wife a concubine and disavowing their intimacy. His language, softened with pleasure or lascivious lap, links erotic access to feminization and emasculinization in early modern term. Effeminacy, in another register, not only liking woman too much, but acting like woman, is embedded in Samson's own identification as, quote, tame weather, a phrase that recalls, of course, Shakespearean will hear, a Shakespearean figure, Antonio of the Merchant of Venice, who calls himself a tainted wether of flock, eluding his implied castration by Shylock, the Jew. So it's interesting that Samson is associated with a Christian being castrated by a Jew, or about to be. Milton's shearing of Samson's precious fleece functions similarly. Hair becomes the site of symbolic castration by his racially othered lover. It is both phallic and divine weapon, like the jawbone of an ass, which he once cut off 1,000 foreskins. He literally narrates how he fight with Philistines and circumcised thousands of them with an organic jawbone of an ass. Once shorn, he is disarmed and effeminately vanquished, reduced to a state of spectacle and abjection, blind, disheartened, shamed, dishonored, quelled, he says. Yet this is not simply a fall into feminization from masculinity, nor a stabilization within either pole of the binary. Rather than marking slippage within the man-woman binarism, Samson Agonistes stages a gender transition that troubles the very logic of identification. From the outset, he is marked as exceptional, quote, select and sacred and glorious, the miracle of man, surpassing human rate. These are the words describing him. His power derives not from normative manhood, but from standing outside it, other than man. At first, he recalls, promise was that I should Israel from Philistine yoke deliver. Now shorn and bound, he finds himself caught eyeless in Gaza at the mill with slaves, himself in bonds under Philistine yoke, unquote. He moves from divine exception to social abjection, and even his origin, my breeding ordered and prescribed as of a person separate to God, is a fiction of divine designation, one he both internalizes and interrogates. Shaped into a sanctified, above-man gender, he's betrayed into another through the violence of intimacy, of interracial love that was denied to him. To read Samson's journey as transcending the boundaries of gender and nation is to see how he mobilizes binaries even as he undoes them. He establishes opposition, circumcised versus uncircumcised, Israelite versus Philistine, chosen versus heathen, man versus woman, only to transgress them. Samson's transit becomes more apparent when his strength is rendered as a fusion of feminine and masculine forces within his body. The chorus observes thee, whose strength, while virtue was her mate, might have subdued the earth, universally crowned with highest praises. Here, strength is unexpectedly gendered feminine, paired with virtue as her masculine mate. This gendering is not incidental. Virtue derives from Latin virtus, manliness, valor, worth, itself from vir, man, the root of viril, defined as marked by strength or force. Though virtue implies strength, the poem distinguishes the two, pairing them as complementary. Strength, meanwhile, from Old English strength or string, a masculine noun, is here feminized. In Samson Agonistes, then, virtue, he, and strength, she, become a conjugal pair whose union could have subdued the earth, an allusion to Genesis' imperative, be fruitful and multiply and subdue it. Like Adam, imagined by some medieval and early modern thinkers as proto-hermaphroditic, body containing Eve, as Leah Divan most recently has evinced, Samson emerges as a composite figure. His strength is not merely masculine or physical, but a fusion of multiple gendered forces married within a singular generative body. Samson, too, describes his fall in terms of bodily reconfiguration, disordered, disarmed, penetrable, and no longer exceeding the ordinary man. His language is saturated with the rhetoric of effeminacy, castration, vulnerability. Reflecting on his betrayal by Delilah, he laments, "He has shipwrecked my vessel, trusted to me from above, gloriously rigged, and for a word, a tear, fool, have divulged the secret gift of God to a deceitful woman." Once divinely rigged, his body is now a wrecked vessel, undone by affect and intimacy, by a word, a tear. Strength without wisdom leaves him unmoored. Immeasurable strength they might behold in me, of wisdom nothing more than mean. These two proportioned ill draw me transverse, he says. The misalignment between body and mind is not simply imbalance, but framed as a transverse motion. Transforms here in the early modern sense, signaling crossing, deviation, or transformation. His failure produces a movement, a shift from one embodied state to another. Maybe Samson transitioned. This coercive metamorphosis manifests most viscerally in Samson's recalling his disclosure to Delilah. "I yielded and unlocked her all my heart, but fool effeminacy held me yoked, her bond slave." The language of unlocked casts here as a key, again, a hinge of gendered failure, opening him to a form of subjection. The betrayal lies not merely in Delilah's act of cutting his hair, but his own effective porosity, which he frames as capitulation to softness and bondage. Delilah, who in Milton's retelling is his very much desired foreign wife with a voice, is not represented as Samson's binary opposite, but his double, embodying not just the seductive, threatening other, but the internalized, feminized self Samson seeks to cast out. Though cast in misogynistic terms, she functions as Samson's echo, making it difficult to idealize his heroic loyalty to his Israeli nation. When she appears, the chorus hesitates. What thing of sea or land, female of sex it seems, that so bedecked, ornate, and gay, comes this way sailing like a stately ship? Femininity here is a surface, it seems, a mobile, adorned spectacle. Her nautical entrance mirrors Samson's earlier lament, shipwrecked, betrayed, undone. Both are figured as vessels, adorned and abundant, burdened with national expectations, and destabilized by erotic entanglement. Delilah's entrance also evokes racialized literary archetypes that those in the room would recognize very well. She conjures the figure of Cleopatra, emblem of Eastern feminine power in early modern Orientalist discourse. As Mary Nyquist notes, Delilah is unmistakably associated with barbaric female rule, rendered through sensory excess and imagined as Cleopatra, the seductive threat from the East. Indeed, the reference to an amber scent of odorous perfume in her portrayal intensify this Oriental association. John Gilroy identifies the geography of her entrance, the ship of Tarsus, as invoking, quote, the same city on the river Cydnus where Cleopatra meets Antony in historical accounts. This resonance, I suggest, deepens through Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra, where Cleopatra threatens to unhair the messenger's head. I will spurn thine eyes like bows before me, I will unhair thy head. Casting blindness and hair cutting as her doing. Furthermore, Samson himself likens his fall to Antony's, seduced by pleasure and voluptuous life in the arm of the other woman. Like Antony, Samson is politically and corporally undone, feminized by desire, softened by luxury, and betrayed by his own susceptibility. The Cleopatra-Delilah analogy is thus an internal structure. Delilah appears as Cleopatra because Samson had already assumed Antony's role. Milton's amber scent casts Delilah's femininity as intoxicating and destabilizing. Her seduction is not just erotic, but transformative. Just as Cleopatra dresses Antony in woman's garment and takes up his sword, Delilah symbolically unmakes Samson, regendering him as cutting his hair. The East in this configuration is not just a space of seduction, but of metamorphosis, where the subject is exposed to love and inverted and remade. This nexus of gender transformation through Orientalized seduction deepens with another intertextual echo, Shakespeare's Othello. The chorus expresses anxiety not merely about gender, but about national and tribal trespass, reminding of the protestations against interracial relations of Desdemona's father, Brabantio. Why thou should have Palestinian woman rather dead than of thine own tribe, fairer or as fair? Their lament frames Delilah as racial, religious other, and infidel figure, and casts Samson's love as both sexual vulnerability and political transgression. Samson internalizes this blame. He confesses, I myself have brought them on, sole author I, sole cause. Echoing Desdemona's fatal self-incrimination, nobody, I, myself. Moreover, speaking to Delilah, he echoes Othello's, I will deny thee nothing, nearly verbatim. Who could deny thee nothing? And he recalls Othello's one that loved not wise, but too well, when lamenting, I loved thee as too well thou knewest, too well unbosomed all my secrets to thee. His rebuke, being once a wife, for me thou wast to leave parents and country, was not I their subject, nor under their protection, but my own, though mine, not theirs, inverts Desdemona's defiance at the Senate. Samson, like Othello, as well as Desdemona, is marked and racialized, set apart by a bodily sign, circumcision. Othello's final evocation of his own circumcision before suicide, "I took by the throat the circumcised dog," distorts into Samson's self-destruction while destroying the other within. Both men slay the selves that transgress racial, religious, and erotic boundaries. The chorus invocation of fairness, "of thine own tribe fairer or as fair," further exposes the racialized optics of the poem. In the early modern discourse, as you're well known, fair connoted not only beauty, but whiteness entangled with virtue and national belonging. The comparative phrasing of chorus casts doubt on Delilah's racial status, while Samson's own praise of her fair appearance suggests her capacity to pass within a visual economy that privileges whiteness. This slippage destabilizes not only Delilah's identity, but Samson's. His susceptibility to pleasure and luxury, his desire for a foreign woman, his blindness, long hair, enslavement and captivity all mark him as Orientalized as well, and ambiguous in terms of both gender and race. Samson Agonistes thus participate in an early modern grammar of gendered and racialized instability, where whiteness, manhood, and virtue are co-constituted but perpetually at risk. If Delilah's fairness is unstable, then is Samson's. His body, like his race, becomes a site of exposure, mixture, and metamorphosis. Milton gives voice to Delilah to defend herself after all these accusations. Delilah, as Samson's gendered double, reflects in her own argument not essential difference but entanglement. "To what I did thou showed me first the way." It's like Caliban, "I know how to curse because you taught me the language," right? She says, Delilah's measured, lucid, and startlingly self-aware response disrupts the moral clarity Samson seeks. She frames betrayal as allegiance, mirroring Samson's own justification for violence as sacred duty. In aligning her act with national loyalty, she draws him into the very softness he scorns, suggesting not opposition, but mutual entrapment in nationalism. What if love, which thou interprets hate, the jealousy of love, powerful of sway in human hearts, nor less in mine towards thee, caused what I did? Her speech implicates both figures in a system that fashions and discards them as tool of vengeance, hallowed by conflicting ideologies from both Israeli and Philistine sides. Her critique of priestly authority and doctrinal coercion, she says, "All these priests came and talked to me all the way about God." Her critique of this authority and doctrinal coercion in her defense further gestures towards a broader machinery of control, a patriarchal and nationalist scaffolding that demands coherence, purity, and singularity, punishing deviation as treason. If Delilah is ultimately returned to her role as monster or betrayer, Samson's genocidal destruction of the temple is less a heroic climax than an unmaking of nation, gender, covenant, or self. Delilah's speech, largely unheeded, becomes the poem's latent prophecy that exposes Samson's fall, as well as the impossible architecture of subjecthood itself. Together, they figure a system that demands impossible wholeness. Their encounter becomes one of recognition and shared undoing, collapsing seduction and betrayal into a joint of metamorphosis, dissolving the very distinctions between Israeli and Philistine, hero and traitor, self and other. For Samson, however, Delilah's racial and gendered ambiguity soon metastasizes into monstrosity. "Out, out, hyena," she cries, invoking not only treachery, but profound gender instability. As Divan notes, the hyena, believed in medieval and early modern lore to change sex at will, signified a violation of natural and divine binary order. By calling Delilah a hyena, Samson casts her as mutable, unnatural, corporally dangerous, and a living breach of gender taxonomy. Milton intensifies this projection through serpentine and sorceress language. Delilah becomes, these are the terms, monster, viper, adder, manifest serpent, a sorcerer who lays traps, gins, toils. Yet this rhetoric of monstrosity reflects not only Delilah's instability, but Samson's own in his entanglement with the very mutability he condemns. The monstrous, then, does not clarify, but collapses binaries, especially when the so-called monster speaks. If Samson ultimately refuses the gendered and racial logics that sought to define him, the poem's final image envisions what might rise from their collapse. The phoenix, Milton's closing emblem, is at once mythic and metamorphic and overall ambiguous. First, his fiery virtue is linked with masculine eagle, only later to be described as that self-begotten bird in the Arabian woods and boast that no second knows nor third, as the phoenix, singular, partnerless, and androgynous. She emerges from out of her ashy womb through self-consuming transformation. More than a symbol of resurrection, then, phoenix figures Samson's final metamorphosis. The phoenix crowns this drama of unmaking and remaking, transfiguring Samson's mutilated body into a flame, generative, singular, and unclassifiable. Milton's Samson Agonistes, then, to conclude, as a closet drama, stages its violence not on the public stage, but in the reader's imaginative theater. It was a closet drama written not to be read, not to be performed. One overlooked by crucial shift in Milton's adaptation is architectural. Where the biblical Samson destroys a temple in Gaza, Milton's Samson brings down a theater, a space of imperial spectacle, elite entertainment, and disciplinary visibility. Milton has always called it temple, but Milton calls it theater. So it's not called temple in destruction. Derived from Greek theatron, a place for seeing, the theater becomes not only a site of performance, but of surveillance, where power is exercised through the act of looking. Further, Agonistes, meaning both actor and combatant, frames Samson's final act as a catastrophic performance, a figure who is seen but cannot see, whose blindness intensifies this theatricality. His desire to be seen culminates in a moment of spectacular unmaking in which performance and destruction converge. Here, the poem's volatile signifier returns here not as a covenant, but as a provocation. The spectacle of sanctified embodiment unravels into divine terror. The phoenix image at the end confirms this trajectory. It is not a promise of renewal, but a grotesque allegory of self-consuming fire. Lay here while a holocaust, writes Milton. Holocaust, in Milton's use, signifies not merely sacrifice, but total incineration, a large destructive fire, a conflagration. That's OED description, a definition. A large destructive fire, a conflagration. This is not atonement, but annihilation. In his final act, the transverse Samson does not redeem, but destroys himself and the Philistines. If the phoenix is reborn from ashes, Gaza is left in this genocidal spectacle, quote, Gaza yet stands, but all her sons are fallen, unquote. So in terms of conclusion, I would like to conclude by a coda titled Eyeless in Gaza, by going back to Clifton's poem to ask what Samson predicts. Clifton's invocation of Gaza in the poem's title situates localized state violence within broader histories of racialized and colonial oppression. Juxtaposition of Gaza and Philadelphia echoes long-standing Black solidarities within Palestinian struggle, a resonance made more urgent by the ongoing atrocities in Gaza today. Black poets and activists have long saw the liberation of Palestine as deeply entangled with the Black liberation. Both are shaped by the legacies of empire, racial capitalism, and state violence in the face of erasure. These transnational resonances have likewise shaped the afterlives of Samson in Black political thought. African-American writers, thinkers, and activists have long claimed, contested, or recast Samson as a revolutionary archetype. His final act, the vengeful destruction of Gaza, even at the cost of his own life, has been variously interpreted. For some Black Muslim members of the Nation of Islam, including Malcolm X, Samson signified militant retribution against white supremacy. For Martin Luther King, it was Milton's Samson, eyeless in Gaza, who offered a warning against retaliatory violence in political struggle. James Baldwin saw in Samson a tragic figure of recursive vengeance, through whom oppression engenders the very force of its own undoing. Each generation, it seems, finds its own Samson, reflected amid recurring cycles of genocide, state terror, and imperial destruction. After 9/11, Samson was projected on the figure of Muslim suicide bomber. Although Samson's story is not included in the Quran or Islamic martyrdom ideology at all. This generated now infamous debate among Miltonists, a debate which in Isa Islam's world is currently the main focal point in Islam-related Milton studies. The move to equate Samson with the Islamic extremism reveals less about the poem than about the Orientalist presumptions post 9/11. Today, it is the Israeli military that echoes Samson's genocidal act. Maybe it is no accident that some of Israeli military operations are named after Samson. The figure of Samson, long claimed by Zionist mythos as a symbol of masculine might and Jewish resurgence, returns as a script for annihilation. Gaza becomes a theater, not just metaphorically, but literally, flattened into rubble and turned into a spectacle of ruin. Since the Hamas attacks of October 2023, Israel has carried out relentless assaults on innocent Gazans. Tens of thousands have been killed, children have been burned alive, families obliterated. Humanitarian agencies now describe the situation as engineered dislocation, starvation, and ethnic cleansing, which has led to Israel being brought before the International Court of Justice on charges of genocide. If connecting it to Samson's hair, in Gaza, besides countless others who are killed, there are children who will never grow hair again. On March 2025, CNN reported 8-year-old Sama Tubayel, who lost nearly all of her hair due to trauma she has endured since Israel's military offensive in Gaza began in 2023. The United Nations has stated that a generation has been traumatized and that nearly all of Gaza's 1.2 million children require psychological support. BBC has documented cases of Gaza girls whose heads were burned, some of whom were fortunate enough to be flown to Italy for treatment. In March 2025, international media recorded the trauma of Palestinian children burned alive, permanently disfigured by the flames that consumed their families and homes. These are just a few examples among countless others since the October attacks. Children whose scalps have been scorched, whose bodies were disfigured by Israeli bombings, victims of incendiary weapons dropped on tent camps and residential shelters. As Clifton wrote to Roman Africa, they will come for you. They will bring fire. These Gazan children are living in the aftermath of a destructive burning, a conflagration, or a Holocaust in the original Miltonic sense of the term. Samson's tragedy ends in fire, in a self-consuming spectacle that takes the enemy within him. But Milton's final image, Phoenix, unsettles this triumphalism. Phoenix is not victorious. It reproduces not through nation, but conflagration. In this image, Milton gives us not an ideal hero, but a figure of radical ambiguity, a subject remade by fire, marked by violence, and left to haunt the ruins. Today, the ashes are real, and the question remains, what will arise from them? Thank you.
I'm just saying we're open. Thank you. Thank you very much for that paper. And thank you for talking about Gaza. My question is, given how you are very persuasively reading strength as depicted in Samson as a feminine entity and perhaps a feminizing entity. This is a very real question because Samson is published with Paradise Regained, which gives us Mary. And of her strength that is a different poem, but they are published together. And Mary is absolutely one of the strongest characters ever written by Milton. Given that you're talking about strength as a feminine and possibly feminizing characteristic, I just would like to invite you to talk a little more about Gaza yet stands, but all her sons are fallen, and what of her daughters?
Yeah, great question, and very scared already to have a question from Miltonist. First time I wrote something and presenting something on Milton, I should accept. But yeah, I mean, strength being feminized and paradise regained. I mean, that I didn't know, but that's great to hear about Milton in Samson. Samson also says strength hung in my hair. That almost like making hair as side of hiding that feminizing thing. But when we come to Samson, I think it is a marriage or togetherness of strength and virtue, masculine and feminine at the same time that I'm really interested in. I'm really thinking Samson is not a normative masculine adult the way it's presented, but above or beyond that, there's something like really trans about Samson's own identity. And if we hate Samson, Samson is maybe a bad trans object, right? Kind of like there's this weird monstrosity in him as well, right? I mean, it's like, but femininity and claiming that femininity within as an strength, I think that is his awareness of his difference, and him and Delilah when they are together, and that is a power as well, like the way Delilah has masculinity in her, right? Like Delilah is also like crossing that. But what about the daughters? Yeah, I mean, I take this from Samson, of course, when they report Gaza yet stands, but all her sons are fallen. I mean, Delilah is not dead, right? One of the difference that Samson Agonistes is also making is not everybody who dies. It's only elite people who are in the theater. The poor people, lower class people are watching the destruction from outside. Right, so this is like also like something that I think Milton is really disillusioned by, with the Civil War and Republic, and there's like I have this very sentiment of nationalism here, right? It's like a failure, and then all these elites are destroyed. Yeah. I mean, I would rather read this her sons that hopefully no woman died, but probably it's just like. Man, yeah, because Gaza is gendered as feminine. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this. I mean, it's so rich of reading that I don't know where to start, but two things that really struck me, and I kept thinking of from a more literary perspective, the whole giant masculine He-Man. I kept thinking of Hercules and Omphale, and that whatever that passage is of his life where he's her servant for a year, he wears a dress, he spins wool, there's that whole weird gender inversion, and she's the queen of Lydia, and somehow there's that aspect of her rule. But then he also, similar to he's not your standard He-Man, not only for that, but he has male lovers like Hylas, and I just think there's such a weird, uncanny echoing of those figures, though I think Milton is staying somehow away from it as much as he can, and really trying to make it a biblical precedent for the later Greek world or something in his mind. So that's something I wondered about, if that plays into your thinking of it. And then the very different thing when it comes to Gaza, I couldn't help but just react kind of viscerally from indigenous studies. The cutting of hair, is such an act of violence on Native children, and it's the symbol of empire. Like, we will change how you look, we will change your signification and your own culture. And there's, if you ever went to the Heard Museum in Phoenix, the great Native Arts Museum, there's this permanent exhibition on boarding schools, and one of the things is a barber's chair with just black hair all over the floor. And I thought, God, it just gives me spook, like to think of that way that it can be such a powerful and destructive act as that. So anyway, it's more of an observation, but I did wonder about the Hercules and Omphale.
No, I mean, definitely I can see that, Hercules being in Orpheus' lab, like, and spinning, right? That this stuff is, like, sword is replaced by this stuff, and there's, like, a kind of gender transition happening, but it's very temporary, right? It's happening, and then she's, like, conquering the Lydian queen. And if anything, I think another Greek precedent would be Achilles, right? Is this murderous monsters. I mean, I don't know how people see Brad Pitt in Achilles. I see a monstrous murder machine, and I see the Samson, the same thing. And there's, like, but with Samson, I think he is, like, born into that gender nonconformity and into a fiction that he believed he is above and beyond other men. And then when he is betrayed through the cut of the hair and blinded, and he's together with other slaves at the grinding mill, then this is, like, another enforced violent transition. So it's just like the first one was not already a natural position anyway. It was what was indoctrinated to him by his father, his religion, that he starts to interrogate. He's like, am I really sacred? Am I really like this? But that weird gender role that he was a part of it, and then using jawbone to circumcise, the uncircumcised itself is an enforced transition from the very beginning. Then happens another one that drives him, I think, crazy and mad at that point, because he's, like, realizing he changed, and that transition happened. And yeah, you're right. I mean, hair, very importantly, if we think the political context, that Milton himself had long hair, right? But he was not like Roundheads. So he was supposed to have short hair if he's on the other camp, right? As opposed to royalists. But he himself was called Lady of Christchurch, right? And hair, so he himself is this ambiguous kind of, like, place in relation to hair and expectations from him, I think, yeah.
Please help me in thanking Amit. Thank you so much. Thank you. I don't need this. Thanks again, Amit. Brilliant and moving. And thank all the speakers today for wonderful